Years pass, presidents come and go. But the words of Barack Obama still cut through the noise. And on this night, his quiet logic left Ivanka Trump without a single thing to say. It was one of those nights that felt bigger than the event itself. A sense of importance filled the air, as if everyone in the room already knew something unforgettable was about to happen. The hall was enormous, with rows of chairs stretching all the way back. Lights shone down from above and television cameras hummed quietly, capturing every glance, every movement. People whispered softly, not wanting to break the electric stillness. This wasn't a regular talk show or a political campaign. It was a national forum, a serious event dedicated to one of the country's most urgent issues, the growing crisis faced by America's senior citizens. The event had been advertised for weeks, and millions were watching from home. The title on the large digital screen behind the stage read, "Caring for America's Elders, Challenges and the Way Forward." But what really drew people in were the names on the program, two guests of honor, two figures from very different worlds. On one side, Barack Obama, the former president known for his calm tone, sharp logic, and ability to turn even the toughest question into a moment of reflection. A man respected not just for what he said, but for how he said it. He had spent years away from politics, but his influence was still undeniable. And on the other side, Ivanka Trump, businesswoman, advisor, and daughter of the sitting president. She carried herself with confidence, perfectly composed, polished in her words and style. To many, she represented a new kind of power, modern, media-savvy, and unshaken under pressure. People weren't just here for a discussion. They were here for a collision. When Obama entered, the room seemed to take a quiet breath. He smiled politely, shaking hands with the moderator, his familiar, calm demeanor disarming yet powerful. Moments later, Ivanka appeared, graceful, smiling, and equally poised. They greeted each other briefly, exchanging a polite handshake that carried the weight of history and rivalry all at once. The cameras flashed. For a second, it looked like harmony, two public figures coming together to talk about something that truly mattered. But beneath that calm surface, something tense was brewing. The audience could feel it. The journalists sitting in the front row straightened in their chairs, pens ready. The host, a well-known TV anchor, stepped to the center of the stage and spoke into the microphone, his voice firm and warm at the same time. "Good evening, everyone," he began. "Tonight, we discuss a subject that affects every American family. Our senior citizens, the men and women who worked, served, and sacrificed to build this nation, deserve to live their later years with dignity, comfort, and care." Applause filled the hall. The topic touched hearts immediately. It wasn't about politics. It was about humanity. As the clapping faded, the host continued. "We're honored to have two extraordinary guests with us tonight, Mr. Barack Obama and Ivanka Trump. We'll begin with opening questions on the challenges facing America's elderly population." Ivanka smiled confidently. Obama sat quietly, his hands folded, watching her with the same steady patience that once defined his presidency. The host turned to Ivanka first. "Miss Trump," he said, "let's begin with you. What should the government's role be in supporting our senior citizens, especially when it comes to health care and daily living costs?" All eyes turned to her. Ivanka leaned toward the microphone. Her voice was smooth, professional, and rehearsed. "Well, first of all," she began, "our administration has always believed in empowering families. We think solutions should come from strong homes and local communities, not just from Washington." She spoke about business incentives, community programs, and the importance of family support. She mentioned her father's economic growth record and how a strong economy benefits older Americans, too. Every sentence sounded crafted, careful, and measured, the kind of response designed to sound perfect, even if it didn't touch the deeper truth. The audience listened, polite but quiet. They wanted more, something real, something emotional. But Ivanka's words stayed on the surface. When she finished, she smiled confidently and leaned back in her chair. The host nodded and turned to Obama. "Mr. Obama," he said, "what's your perspective on the challenges facing seniors today?" Obama didn't answer right away. He looked thoughtful, like someone who wanted to weigh his words carefully before releasing them. His silence alone drew attention. The audience leaned forward. Finally, he said, "I think Ivanka made some good points about families and communities, but I also think there's another side we can't ignore. His tone was calm, but there was power behind it, the kind of quiet confidence that made people instinctively pay attention. He wasn't trying to sound impressive. He was trying to sound real. He paused for a moment, letting the weight of his next words build. Because when a senior citizen spends their life building this country and ends up choosing between buying medicine or buying food, something's wrong. That's not about family values. That's about national values. The audience murmured in agreement. A few people nodded slowly. Even those who disagreed couldn't help but listen. Obama's words flowed like a conversation rather than a speech. Simple, clear, human. His focus wasn't politics. It was people. Ivanka glanced at him, her smile still there, but a little tighter now. She wasn't expecting the quiet force behind his tone. The host looked from one to the other, sensing that what had just started might turn into something far more intense than anyone planned. The first question was over, but the debate had just begun. And deep down, everyone in that hall knew that before the night ended, one of them would walk away with the upper hand, and the other a scar they'd never forget. The lights dimmed slightly as the camera focused on Ivanka Trump. The audience waited, their eyes fixed on her. She was known for her poise, her ability to appear untouched by pressure. Tonight, though, there was something sharper in her expression, a glimmer of determination mixed with pride. She crossed one leg over the other, straightened her papers, and leaned toward the microphone with a calm, practiced smile. "Thank you," she began, her tone smooth and confident. "It's an honor to be here tonight to discuss something so close to our hearts, how we care for our parents and grandparents." Her words floated easily through the room. For a moment, it sounded perfect, the kind of polished beginning that fits neatly into headlines. She spoke about family values and responsibility. She reminded the audience that strong families were the backbone of America and that no government program can replace the love of a child caring for their aging parent. People in the crowd nodded politely, though not passionately. Her voice was graceful, but it felt rehearsed. There was an invisible distance between her and the problem she was describing. She wasn't wrong, but she wasn't connecting either. Ivanka continued, speaking about how her father's administration had created economic growth and new jobs, how that prosperity was helping older Americans live better lives. She listed achievements, programs, and tax incentives. Each sentence sounded like it had been carefully reviewed by a team of advisors before making its way to the microphone. Then she smiled again and said, "We believe in empowering individuals, not creating dependence. Seniors deserve dignity, not pity, and the best way to protect their dignity is through opportunity." Her final words drew polite applause. The sound was respectable, but short-lived, almost like the audience clapped because they knew they should, not because they wanted to. A few people in the front row glanced at Obama. He was sitting perfectly still, his expression calm, but his eyes were focused, sharp, almost analytical. When the applause faded, the host leaned forward and said, "Thank you, Ms. Trump. Mr. Obama, you've heard Ivanka's opening thoughts. What's your take on the state of senior care in America today?" Obama smiled slightly, not mockingly, but in a way that signaled he'd been waiting for this moment. He took a breath and began. "Ivanka makes some strong points about family and responsibility. I think we can all agree those values are essential." But he paused for a beat, and the silence in the room thickened. What happens to the people who don't have a family to care for them? Every head in the audience turned toward him. He spoke slowly, not as if delivering a speech, but as if having a conversation. His voice was low, steady, and warm. Right now, across this country, millions of older Americans are living alone. They've worked hard their entire lives. They've raised children, paid taxes, built communities, and now they're struggling just to keep the lights on. They're not asking for handouts. They're asking not to be forgotten. The atmosphere shifted. The polite, measured energy that had filled the room during Ivanka's remarks was replaced by something deeper. Empathy. Obama continued, "We talk about family values, and we should, but leadership isn't just about what happens inside our own homes. It's about how we treat those who don't have anyone left at their dinner table." Ivanka adjusted her posture, watching him carefully, her expression unreadable. He went on, painting quiet, powerful images that stayed in the audience's minds. "I met a retired bus driver once," he said. "She told me she had to choose between paying for her heart medication and paying rent. She looked me in the eye and said, Mr. President, I can't afford both, but I can't live without either. That's not a problem you fix with slogans. That's a problem that needs compassion and real reform. There was no applause yet, just silence. The kind of silence that only comes when people are truly listening. Obama leaned slightly closer to the microphone. Families are strong, but families alone can't fight the rising cost of health care. Families can't rewrite Medicare policy. Families can't stop the price of insulin from doubling. He paused again. That's why government exists. Not to replace families, but to support them. A few people in the audience started clapping softly. Then it grew louder. The message was simple, but it hit home. Ivanka tilted her head, her smile returning, though a little tighter this time. She wasn't expecting this quiet, controlled tone from Obama. She'd come prepared for a debate filled with political sparring, not this kind of gentle logic that cut deeper than any attack ever could. When the applause faded, Obama added one final thought. Leadership, he said, isn't measured by how loudly you talk about strength. It's measured by how gently you handle those who are weakest. That line hit like a whisper that turned into an echo. The host blinked, stunned for a second, then said softly, "Thank you, Mr. Obama." Ivanka cleared her throat quickly, leaning toward her microphone. "If I may," she said with a small smile, "I think it's important to remember that the private sector can innovate faster than government. We can't keep throwing money at problems. We have to create sustainable solutions through business partnerships." She was recovering, regaining her rhythm, reminding herself that she could not show discomfort. But her voice carried a slight edge now, a defensive note hiding behind her poise. Obama listened without interruption, nodding as if he understood every word. But there was something in his eyes, quiet certainty, maybe even a touch of sadness, as if he knew exactly where this conversation was heading. When she finished, she gave him a look that was polite but challenging, the kind that said, "Your move." He didn't answer right away. He glanced down at his notes, then looked back up, his expression unreadable. And at that moment, everyone in the room could sense it. Something was coming. The polite tone, the careful words, the safe debate, all of it was about to end. What began as a discussion about senior citizens was about to turn into a clash of minds, values, and truth itself. The calm before the storm was over. The moment Obama began to speak, the atmosphere in the hall shifted. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quiet. That kind of silence that comes when people lean in without even realizing it. He didn't need to raise his voice or pound a table to command attention. The calm in his tone did it for him. He began softly, almost like he was thinking out loud. "You know," he said, "I've met a lot of seniors in my life, men and women who worked hard, played by the rules, and gave everything they had to their families and communities. And what strikes me most isn't how tired they are, but how forgotten they feel." The audience stilled completely. Even Ivanka, who had been flipping through her notes, looked up. Obama's voice carried warmth, but also weight, like every word was chosen carefully, meant to land with meaning. He continued, "Imagine this, a woman who worked 35 years in a factory. She raised 2 kids, paid her taxes, never missed a day of work. Now she's 72, and she can't afford the medicine her doctor prescribed. Every month, she looks at her bills and asks herself a question no one her age should ever have to ask: what can I live without this month?" The audience's eyes were on him, unmoving. He wasn't just talking numbers. He was painting pictures. He paused, letting the image sink in before moving on. Or think about the men who fought for this country, served proudly, came home, worked in construction his whole life. Now his rent keeps climbing, but his pension doesn't. He's not asking for luxury. He just wants a warm home and a meal he doesn't have to skip. Someone in the crowd murmured quietly, and a few heads nodded. There was something painfully real in his voice, the kind of truth that couldn't be rehearsed. Obama went on, "We like to talk about the economy growing, about progress and opportunity. But progress doesn't mean much if the people who built that progress can't afford to live in the country they helped shape. If the people who once built our homes now can't afford one themselves, then we've missed something important along the way." He shifted slightly in his seat, his expression thoughtful. "Let's be honest, for many seniors, life feels like it's getting harder, not easier. Prices go up. Medicine gets more expensive. Social Security barely covers basic needs. And when they turn to a system that promises to protect them, they find walls instead of doors. He didn't need to attack anyone directly. The truth itself was enough of a weapon. Medicare was supposed to be a shield, he said. But too often it's a maze. You try to get care and you get paperwork. You try to see a doctor and you get waiting lists. You try to find help and you end up lost in a system that forgot how to listen. The host, sitting quietly to the side, didn't interrupt. Even he looked absorbed in the moment. Obama's tone softened again, like he was speaking not to the room but directly to someone out there watching, maybe an elderly viewer sitting alone at home. These are not just statistics. These are people's lives. These are our parents, our grandparents, our neighbors. And how we treat them says everything about who we are. He let those words linger. Then he leaned forward slightly, his voice taking on more strength. Now, I know there are people who say the government shouldn't do too much, that people need to take care of themselves. I understand that argument. But when you're 80 years old and your body doesn't work like it used to, and you've already given everything you had, who exactly are you supposed to turn to? The room was utterly still. He went on, we can talk about innovation or free markets or private solutions, but at the end of the day, this isn't about business. It's about values. It's about whether we're willing to look after those who looked after us. Then his voice dropped just a little lower, quiet, steady, and unforgettable. If leadership doesn't care for the people who can no longer fight for themselves, then it's not leadership. It's just power pretending to have a heart. The audience erupted in applause, longer this time. It wasn't the polite kind of applause Ivanka had received earlier. It was emotional, heartfelt, the kind that comes when something true finally finds words. Obama nodded slightly, acknowledging the response, but not basking in it. When the noise faded, he continued, we need a government that doesn't just talk about numbers on a budget, but talks about the faces behind those numbers. A government that understands that growing old should never mean growing invisible. He began to list solutions, not like a policy expert, but like a neighbor offering ideas. We need stronger financial support for seniors, benefits that actually keep up with the cost of living. We need to protect Medicare, not chip away at it. We need affordable housing that keeps people safe and close to their communities. And we need to remember that loneliness is a health crisis, too, because isolation can hurt the heart just as much as any disease. Each idea sounded simple but powerful, grounded in empathy and logic. He didn't sound like he was promising miracles. He sounded like someone who genuinely believed things could get better if people cared enough to try. By the time he stopped, the room felt different. Even those who disagreed couldn't ignore the clarity of what they just heard. There was no shouting, no showmanship, just truth laid bare, piece by piece, until no one could pretend not to see it. Obama smiled faintly, almost sadly, as if to say the problem was obvious, and that was the tragedy of it all. He ended softly, we measure our greatness not by how high the young can climb, but by how gently we carry the old. And that was it. The applause came again, louder, longer, echoing off the walls of the hall. Ivanka sat still, expression unreadable, her fingers gripping the edge of her notes. She hadn't expected this kind of quiet storm. Not an attack, but something far more powerful, compassion wrapped in logic. The host finally cleared his throat, breaking the silence. Thank you, Mr. Obama, he said, his voice slightly shaky. That was quite something. But before he could ask the next question, Ivanka leaned forward suddenly, her face tightening into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. And that's when the debate began to change. Because Ivanka wasn't about to let this moment go. Quietly, the room had just finished echoing with applause. People were still processing what they'd heard from Obama, that mix of compassion and hard truth that made it hard to argue back. But then, just as the crowd began to settle, Ivanka Trump leaned forward in her seat, eyes sharp, her voice slicing through the calm like a blade. Let's be honest, she said with a tight smile. All these problems you mentioned, the financial struggles, the healthcare issues, the housing crisis, they didn't appear overnight. They came from years of weak leadership and empty promises, including, if I may remind everyone, your time in office, Mr. Obama. The air seemed to shift. People turned toward her, curious and cautious. Obama didn't react. He just sat there, hands folded, watching her with quiet patience. Ivanka pressed on, her tone growing stronger. You speak about seniors struggling as if you had no part in it. But during your administration, costs went up, programs were mismanaged, and people were left behind. It's interesting that you now stand here acting like the hero of a story you helped write. There was a small murmur in the audience, half agreement, half discomfort. Ivanka sensed it and leaned into it. You know, she continued, my father, President Trump, is fixing the mess that others left behind. He's rebuilding the economy, creating jobs, and ensuring that Americans, including seniors, can once again believe in the system. Her words came out rehearsed, polished, the kind of lines that sound good in headlines, but behind them was a cold edge. She turned slightly toward Obama and said, so, forgive me if I find it a little hard to believe that the man who helped cause the problem is suddenly the one with all the answers. A few gasps rippled through the audience. It wasn't just her words. It was the tone, the way she made it sound personal. Obama didn't move. His face was unreadable. Calm as ever. Then Ivanka took it further. You talk about compassion, but where was the compassion when seniors lost their homes under your watch? Where was the compassion when health care premiums rose? You're good with words, Mr. Obama. Always have been. But maybe what the country needs is less talk and more action. There it was, the jab, sharp and deliberate. She wanted to break his calm, to drag him into a back and forth where she could play offense. But Obama didn't take the bait. He took a slow breath, his voice steady when he finally spoke. Ivanka, I appreciate your passion, he began, his tone kind but firm. But when you blame others, especially without context, you miss something important, that governing is never about one person. It's about the choices we make together. And it's about the people who feel those choices most, the ones who don't have the luxury of power. Ivanka's jaw tightened slightly. Obama continued, you can talk about fixing problems, but if you can't even acknowledge them with honesty, how will you ever fix them? Her smile wavered for a moment. Then, almost too quickly, she tried to turn the attention again. Well, honesty is an interesting word coming from you, she said, her tone dripping with mock politeness. Maybe we should start by being honest about responsibility. Or even identity. The audience stiffened. The words hung heavy in the air. Obama looked at her, calm, but there was a flicker of disappointment in his eyes. Ivanka leaned back, pretending to be casual, but her next line hit like a spark in a room full of dry air. First, she said, smirking, prove you're even American. The crowd reacted instantly. Whispers, murmurs, even a few gasps. The insult wasn't new, but it was ugly. It brought back memories of old accusations and painful rhetoric that Obama had long faced and risen above. For a moment, time felt frozen. Then Obama spoke again, slowly, clearly. Ivanka, when you run out of logic, insults come easy. But this isn't about you or me. It's about our elders who can't pay their bills. About the nurse who works 2 shifts and still can't afford medicine for her mother. They don't care about where I was born. They care about whether anyone's listening. His words landed heavy, his voice unwavering. It wasn't anger. It was grace, the kind that burns deeper than shouting ever could. The audience began nodding almost instinctively. Obama's calm presence drew the attention back where it belonged. But Ivanka wasn't done. She tried to cut in again, her voice louder, more defensive. Now you always make yourself sound noble, but you're no different from any other politician who makes promises and disappears when it's time to deliver. Obama looked at her quietly, then said, the difference, Ivanka, is that I didn't disappear. I just didn't need to shout to be seen. The crowd erupted, applause, murmurs, a few cheers. Ivanka's expression faltered for a split second, a flash of irritation breaking through her polished demeanor. But before she could respond, Obama spoke again. And this time, his words carried both compassion and quiet power. I came here to talk about people, not politics, not personalities. But if we must talk about accountability, then let's be fair. Every administration has flaws. Every leader makes mistakes. What matters is whether you learn from them or just point fingers. His tone wasn't harsh, but it carried weight. Blaming others may score points in the moment, he said softly. But it never solves anything. And if our elders are still struggling, that means every one of us, past and present, has work to do. The hall was silent again. Even those who had sided with Ivanka earlier were now listening differently. There was something about the way Obama spoke, calm, unshaken, grounded in reason, that made emotional attacks sound small in comparison. Ivanka sat back, crossing her arms. Her confidence was slightly cracked. For the first time, her smile looked forced. Obama ended that exchange with one final sentence that lingered in the air long after he said it: when the goal is to help people, ego has no place in the room. It was simple. It was human. And it landed like a quiet thunderclap. As the audience broke into applause once more, Ivanka turned her eyes away, the faintest trace of unease flickering across her face. The battle of words was far from over. But for that moment, it was clear who had control, and everyone in the room could feel it. The air was thick with tension. After Obama's last statement, the energy in the room had completely changed. What had begun as a polished political exchange had turned into something far more personal and far more dangerous. Ivanka Trump, her expression still composed but her voice carrying a sharp edge, wasn't ready to surrender the spotlight. She leaned forward again, her tone cooler now, the smile on her lips carefully measured. "You speak about ego, Mr. Obama, but maybe you should take a look in the mirror. You talk like a saint, but your time in office left scars on this nation, scars we're still healing from. So forgive me if I don't see you as the wise man in the room." The words sliced through the air, but Obama didn't flinch. His silence seemed to rattle her more than anger ever could. Ivanka pressed on, her voice rising. "You keep pointing to compassion and unity. But where was that unity when America was divided under your watch? Where was your leadership then?" The audience watched closely, waiting for Obama's response. His composure was almost unnerving. When he finally spoke, his tone was calm, but every word hit with quiet precision. "You know, Ivanka," he said softly, "when people feel unheard, they look for someone to blame. It's easier than facing the truth. But the truth is, unity doesn't come from one president. It comes from people choosing to see one another again." Ivanka's smile tightened. "Nice speech," she said dryly. "But speeches don't fix broken systems." Obama nodded slightly. "True," he said. "But insults don't fix them either." The audience reacted with a low hum of approval. Ivanka's shoulders stiffened. Her calm, confident mask was beginning to show cracks. And then, in what felt like a desperate attempt to regain control, she shifted gears completely. "You know what your problem is," she said, her tone turning sharp. "You pretend to be this moral voice, but everyone knows the truth. You just like to play the victim. Maybe you should stop talking about compassion and start being honest about your failures." Obama raised an eyebrow. "Honesty is important," he said quietly. "Let's start with that." Then he leaned slightly forward, not as an attack, but with the kind of curiosity that made everyone else lean in too. "You talk about leadership and responsibility," he continued. "But tell me, Ivanka, how responsible is it to hold a position of power not because of your record, but because of your father's influence?" A murmur ran through the audience. Ivanka blinked, her confidence faltering just a little. Obama didn't raise his voice, he didn't need to. "You talk about systems being broken. But when power becomes a family heirloom, how do you expect the system to ever heal?" The hall was dead silent. Ivanka's eyes narrowed, and her lips parted in disbelief. She hadn't expected him to go there. Trying to recover, she let out a short laugh. "Oh, that's rich," she said, her tone sarcastic. "Are you really trying to question my position? Maybe you should worry less about my family and more about your own legacy." Obama didn't move. He simply asked, "Is that what this is about? Legacy? Or approval?" Ivanka froze. The line hit harder than she expected. But before anyone could react, Obama continued, still calm, still steady. "You know, Ivanka, I've always believed leadership isn't about who you know or what name you carry. It's about what you do when no one's watching. When the cameras are gone, when the easy thing is to say nothing but you speak up anyway." Ivanka was silent, her jaw tightening. And then Obama asked the question that sent a jolt through the entire room. "You talk about leadership, family, and values. But tell me something, are you sure Trump is your father?" The words hit like lightning. A collective gasp spread through the hall. Even those who disliked Obama weren't expecting that. Ivanka's face went pale, her expression cracking completely for the first time. "Excuse me," she said, voice trembling between shock and outrage. Obama didn't smile. His tone remained serious, calm, and deliberate. Because leadership built on borrowed power always asks that question, how much of it is truly yours? It was poetic, sharp, impossible to ignore. Ivanka's composure shattered. She tried to laugh it off, but the sound came out brittle. "Wow," she said, shaking her head. "That's low, even for you. I guess when you're out of arguments, you resort to cheap shots. Maybe that's why people stop believing in your so-called wisdom." Obama simply looked at her and said quietly, "Wisdom isn't loud. It just lasts longer." That single line broke the tension. Not with laughter, not with applause, but with an unmistakable sense that the conversation had shifted completely in his favor. Ivanka tried to speak again, but the audience wasn't with her anymore. The energy had moved away from her defensiveness and toward Obama's calm authority. He straightened slightly, his tone softening. "You know, Ivanka," he said, "I don't say these things to attack you. I say them because leadership without reflection is dangerous. Power without humility doesn't build nations. It breaks them." There was no anger, no mockery, just truth. And that truth felt heavier than any insult. Then, after a long pause, Obama looked out at the audience. "This discussion isn't about who wins or who's right," he said. "It's about who listens. Because if our leaders stop listening, if we stop caring about our elders, our veterans, our most vulnerable, then we lose more than debates. We lose our humanity." The room was silent. Every face was turned toward him. Even Ivanka, for once, didn't speak. Obama stood, smoothing his jacket. "Respect," he said quietly, "isn't something you demand. It's something you earn. And sometimes you earn it by walking away." He nodded to the host, offered a polite smile, and turned to leave the stage. As he walked off, the audience rose to their feet, not with roaring cheers, but with quiet, steady applause, the kind that speaks not of excitement, but of admiration. Ivanka sat still, frozen in place, her eyes following him. For the first time, she looked unsure, not defeated, but shaken. Obama paused at the edge of the stage and glanced back just once. "Think about what kind of leader you want to be," he said softly, "because someday the noise fades and only truth remains." He walked away. The audience stayed standing, and even those who didn't agree with him knew they'd witnessed something rare, not a man fighting to win, but a man standing for what mattered. And in that quiet, powerful moment, Barack Obama didn't just outsmart Ivanka Trump, he outclassed her.